The metal bars were cold against Jara Kaine's palms, and beyond them, a crowd of humans pointed and whispered, their children clutching sugar sticks while their parents paid copper coins to gawk at the monster in the wagon. She stood, because sitting made them tap the bars and shout louder, and she had learned that stillness sometimes made them lose interest faster. Though today the fair was thick with visitors, and the wagon never emptied of faces. Her green skin caught the afternoon light, her small tusks visible when she breathed, and she kept her pointed ears flat against her skull, because the children liked to throw things when she moved them. The dress they had given her was torn at the shoulder deliberately to show more skin, and the sign above the cage read "Wild Orc Woman," captured on the northern border, extremely dangerous. She was none of those things. She had been a farmhand before the fair's owner had found her sleeping in a barn 2 towns back, alone and looking for work, and had drugged her cider and locked her in this cage before she woke. That had been 6 weeks ago, and she had stopped screaming for help after the first 3 days when she realized no one cared. The crowd shifted, and a man stepped to the front. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark brown hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothing was well made but dusty from travel, leather boots worn but expensive, and he carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. He did not point or whisper. He looked at her and then he looked at the sign, and something in his face went hard and cold. Jara met his gaze. She was tired of looking down. He turned and walked away, and she felt a strange disappointment. Most people at least stayed to get their money's worth of staring. She pressed her forehead against the bars and closed her eyes. An hour later, the fair's owner appeared at the wagon. Sela's mooring was a red-faced man who smelled of whiskey and sweat, and he was shouting at someone Jara could not see. "You cannot be serious. The whole damned fair." "I am completely serious." The voice was calm, deep, the same man from earlier. "I have the funds in letter of credit from the Merchants' Guild of Havers Cross. You will have your money by morning when the courier returns. But the fair is worth 1,200 in assets if we are generous. 700 in debts to various vendors from what I have observed today. I am offering you 1,000, clean and assumption of all debts. You walk away solvent." There was a long silence. Jara opened her eyes and pressed against the side of the wagon to see. The tall man stood with his arms crossed, and Silas was sweating, his eyes darting. "Why?" Silas finally asked. "Why would you want this wreck?" "That is my business." Another silence, and then Silas spat into the dirt. "Fine, draw up the papers, but I want half tonight." "You will have a signed contract tonight and full payment when the courier returns tomorrow. You may sleep in your own wagon until then. After that, you leave." Silas stared, then cursed and stalked away. The tall man watched him go, then turned and walked directly to Jara's cage. Up close, his eyes were gray, not storm-colored, but there was something unyielding in them. He looked at the lock at her, then back at the lock. "Can you pick this?" he asked. Jara blinked. "What? The lock? Can you open it from inside?" "No, why would I still be here if I could?" He nodded, as though she had confirmed something. "I will be back in less than an hour." He turned and walked toward the fair's main office without another word. Jara sank onto the wagon's filthy floor and waited. Around her, the fair continued, music from a broken calliope wheezing over the noise of the crowd. She did not let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. 53 minutes later, by the church bells in the distant town, the man returned. He carried a ring of keys, and another man followed him, a clerk with ink-stained fingers holding a sheaf of papers. The tall man unlocked her cage with the third key he tried, and the door swung open. "You are free," he said simply. Jara stared at him. The clerk was already moving to the next wagon, where a fortune teller sat behind bars, a woman with dark eyes and silver hair. Beyond that, a wagon held a bear with scars across its muzzle. Another contained what the signs claimed was a two-headed calf, though Jara had never seen it herself. "Free," the man repeated. "You can go." "Go where?" Her voice came out harsh. She had not spoken more than a few words in days. He paused, then nodded again, that same confirming gesture. "That is a fair question. Do you have anywhere?" "No." "Then stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will determine what comes next." He moved to the next cage, leaving her sitting in the open doorway of the wagon, unable to make her legs work. The fortune teller climbed out of her wagon slowly, her wrists marked from manacles. The clerk was working on the bear's cage, though the animal only watched him with dull eyes. The two-headed calf was already dead, Jara realized. It had been dead for days, and no one had removed it. The tall man saw it too. His jaw tightened, and he told the clerk something Jara could not hear. The clerk nodded and hurried away. Jara finally made herself stand. Her legs shook, and she had to catch the wagon side to keep from falling. The man turned and saw her, and in 3 strides he was there, his hand under her elbow steadying her. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "This morning." "Bread. Before that?" "Yesterday. Bread." He muttered something that might have been a curse. "Come." He guided her toward the fair's cook tent, which was closed for the evening. He picked the lock with a bent nail, and she watched in fascination as he worked. Inside, he found a wheel of cheese, hard sausage, apples, and a jug of cider. He poured the cider out and filled the jug with water from the pump outside. "Eat slowly," he said, setting the food in front of her on a wooden table. "You will be sick otherwise." Jara bit into an apple, and the sweetness nearly made her weep. She forced herself to chew slowly, to swallow carefully. He sat across from her and watched, not eating himself. "What is your name?" he asked after a while. "Jara Kaine." "I am Fletcher Jorren." She took another bite, studying him. "Why did you do this?" "Because it was wrong. People do wrong things every day." "Yes, but I had the means to stop this one." She frowned. "You spent 1,000 on a dying fair and a cage full of—" She stopped. "A cage full of people," he finished quietly. "Yes." They sat in silence while she ate. The fortune teller appeared in the doorway, hesitant, and Fletcher waved her in. "There is food," he said. "Take what you need." The woman sat and ate without speaking, tears running down her face. The clerk returned with 2 other men, and they carried the dead calf away wrapped in canvas. Fletcher gave them coins and sent them to bury it properly. By the time the church bells rang midnight, Silas had signed the papers and taken his first payment, and he was drunk in his wagon. Fletcher had claimed the office, a listing wooden structure with a desk and 2 chairs, and he spent the night going through ledgers by lamplight. Jara found a bedroll in one of the storage tents and lay down, but she could not sleep. She kept expecting the cage door to slam shut again. Morning came gray and cool. Fletcher emerged from the office looking tired but steady. The courier arrived an hour later with the funds, and Silas took his money and left without looking at any of them, driving a hired cart toward the town. Fletcher watched him go, then turned to survey the fair. It was a wreck. The wagons were rotting, the tents patched and repatched, the equipment broken. The bear lay in its cage, refusing to move. There were 7 people who had been working the fair, not counting Silas, and they stood in a nervous cluster, waiting. Fletcher walked to them. "The fair is closed," he said. "You are all released from employment. I will pay you what wages are owed and provide funds for travel if you wish to leave." They stared at him. One of them, a young man who had run the gaming booth, spoke up. "Travel where?" "Wherever you wish." "I have got no place." "Nor I," said another. Fletcher looked at them, then at Jara, then at the fortune teller whose name was Myron. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the wreckage of the fair, the empty fields around it, the forest beyond. "I have an idea," he said slowly. "But it will require work." Over the next 3 days, he laid out his plan. The fair sat on 20 acres of land that Silas had leased but never paid for. Fletcher bought the land outright from the local lord, who was happy to sell a property that had only brought complaints. The cages would be torn down. The wagons would be converted or sold. The land would become a farm, a working farm, and anyone who wished to stay could work it and share in its yields. "A sanctuary," Myron said softly, "for those with nowhere else." "A farm," Fletcher corrected. "Sanctuaries are for saints. We will grow food and raise animals and sell what we do not need. But yes, for those who wish a place." 6 of the 7 former fair workers left. They took their pay and their travel funds and disappeared down the road, and Jara did not blame them. The 7th, the young man named Peter, stayed. So did Myron. And the bear, who Fletcher enlisted a local animal handler to help coax from its cage with honeyed oats and patience. It took 2 weeks, but the bear finally emerged, limping on a back leg that had been broken and healed badly. The animal handler said it would never survive in the wild again. "Then it stays here," Fletcher said, and he had Peter build an enclosure, large and open, with a shelter and a stream running through it. Jara watched all of this with a feeling she could not name. Fletcher moved through the work like a man born to it, directing and lifting and planning, and at night he went over the ledgers and the seed catalogs and the almanacs. He had a fortune, clearly, or access to one, but he spent it carefully, weighing each purchase. On the 5th day, he found Jara standing in the middle of the empty field that would become the garden plot. "You have been avoiding me," he said. "No, you have not spoken more than 10 words to me since the first night." She turned to face him. "What do you want me to say?" "Anything." "Everything? You were caged and now you are not. I imagine you have thoughts." "I have thoughts," she agreed. "I think you are either the best man I have ever met or the most foolish. Can I not be both? I think you spent a fortune on strangers, and now you are turning a rotting fair into a farm that may never turn a profit. I think you unlocked my cage and then asked nothing in return. I do not understand you." He looked at her for a long moment. "What would you have understood?" "If you had wanted something, if you had asked me to work off the debt or other things, that I would have understood." His face went cold again, the way it had when he first saw her cage. "I do not trade in debts. You owe me nothing." "Then why?" "I told you. It was wrong." "So you right every wrong you see. You must be exhausted." "I right the ones in front of me that I can afford to fix." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Does it truly matter why? You are free. Go if you wish. I will give you funds and a horse." She stared at him. "You would?" "Yes." "Just like that. Just like that." She turned back to the field. The soil was good, dark, and rich. The land rolled gently toward the forest, and the stream that fed the bear's enclosure ran through the western edge. It could work. It could actually work. "I was a farmhand," she said quietly. "Before, I know crops and animals and how to manage land." "I know horses," Fletcher said. "I have worked with them all my life, but I know little about farming." She looked at him sidelong. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a partnership if you want it. You manage the farm. I will handle the finances and procure what we need. We split the profits equally among all who work here. You would trust me with that?" "Yes. You do not know me. I know you were caged and did not break. I know you did not run when the door opened, because you are practical and you think before you act. I know you are standing in this field looking at it the way I look at horses, seeing what it could become." He paused. "Am I wrong?" She bent and picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through her fingers. "No," she said finally. "You are not wrong. They planted in the spring." Jara organized the work with a confidence that surprised even her, laying out rows for wheat and barley, plotting space for vegetables, setting aside fields for grazing. Fletcher purchased chickens and goats and 2 cows, and Peter built coops and pens under Jara's direction. Myron, who was too old for heavy labor, took over the kitchen and the household management, and she proved to have a gift for stretching supplies. The work was hard. They were up before dawn and fell into bed after dark. Fletcher worked beside them, hauling and digging and building, and Jara revised her opinion of him slightly. He was not foolish. He was stubborn and determined, and he did not shy from dirty work. He also had a temper, though he kept it tightly leashed. She saw it the day a merchant from town tried to cheat them on the price of seed, claiming the orc and her freaks did not deserve fair rates. Fletcher had gone very still, very quiet, and then he had informed the merchant that he would take his business elsewhere, and that he would be certain to tell every trader and farmer within 50 miles why. The merchant had backed down, stammering. Fletcher had paid the fair price and walked away without another word. "You did not have to do that," Jara said as they loaded the wagon. "Yes, I did. He might cause trouble. Let him." She studied him. "You have a hard streak." "Yes," he met her eyes. "Some things I will not bend on." They drove back in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. The wagon was heavy with seed, and the spring sun was warm, and Jara felt something she had not felt in years. Safe. She felt safe. The crops grew. Jara walked the fields every morning, checking for pests and disease, adjusting irrigation from the stream. Peter turned out to have a knack for carpentry, and he built a proper barn and reinforced the fences. Myron planted an herb garden and started brewing tonics and teas that she sold in the town market. The bear, whom they had named Bruno, because Myron said he needed a gentle name to grow into, began to put on weight and lost some of the dullness in his eyes. Fletcher was gone often, traveling to markets and auctions to buy and sell horses. He had a reputation, Jara learned. Fletcher Jorren was known as a fair dealer who never misrepresented an animal, and buyers trusted him. He brought back profits that he poured into the farm, purchasing better equipment, hiring day laborers for the harvest. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he softened. Jara saw it first in the way he spoke to the animals, low and gentle, coaxing a skittish mare or calming a nervous colt. Then she saw it in the way he listened to Peter's ideas for expanding the barn, nodding thoughtfully instead of dismissing them. He smiled more. He sat with them at meals and told stories about the places he had traveled. He asked Jara about her plans for the winter crops, and he listened carefully, asking questions that proved he valued her expertise. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the fireflies rise from the fields. The day's work was done, and the air smelled of fresh hay and earth. "I did not think it would work," Jara admitted. "When you first said it, a farm from a fair, I thought you were mad." "I was not certain either," Fletcher said. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands steady. "But I knew staying still was not an option." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "I lost my family young. My parents to fever, my sister to childbirth. I inherited money and a business, and for a long time I used both to avoid thinking about any of it. I traveled constantly, worked constantly, never stayed anywhere long enough to feel the absence." Jara waited. "And then I saw you in that cage, and I saw the bear and that fortune teller, and I realized I had been living in a cage of my own making. Moving but trapped. Does that make sense?" "Yes. Buying the fair was not charity, it was selfish. I needed to stop moving. I needed to build something that mattered." "And does it matter?" He looked at her, and there was something unguarded in his face. "More than I expected," her breath caught. She looked away, out at the fields, her heart beating too fast. She was not naive. She knew what was growing between them, had felt it in the way his hand lingered when he passed her tools, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. She felt it in herself, the way she found excuses to work near him, the way she listened for his voice. But she was an orc and he was human, and the world did not smile on such things. As if reading her mind, he said quietly, "I do not care what people think. You should. It will make trouble for you, for the farm. Let it." Fletcher, Jara. He set down the wood and turned to face her fully. "I am not a boy. I know what I feel and I know what I am choosing. If you do not feel the same, tell me and I will never speak of it again. But do not tell me to care what strangers think." She met his eyes. "I do not know how to do this, neither do I. Your reputation is built on honesty and fair dealing. This is both honest and fair. People will call you, I do not care." His voice was firm. "Let them call me what they wish, it will not change how I feel." She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. But she had spent her whole life learning that wanting something did not make it possible. "Let me think," she whispered. He nodded and picked up his whittling again, and they sat in silence while the fireflies danced. The harvest came in strong. The wheat and barley were good quality, and they sold for fair prices. The vegetables filled Myron's root cellar, and the goats and cows were healthy. Peter built a smokehouse, and they began curing meats for winter. By autumn, the farm was not just surviving but thriving, and then Silas returned. He arrived on a cold October morning, riding in a hired wagon with two rough-looking men. Jara saw them from the fields and felt her stomach drop. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked quickly to the house. "Fletcher." He emerged from the barn, saw her face, then followed her gaze to the wagon. His expression went flat. "Stay behind me." "No, Jara, no." They walked together to meet the wagon. Silas climbed down, grinning. He had lost weight and gained a mean look, and he held a rolled paper in one hand. "Jorren," he said, "good to see the old place looking so well. You are not welcome here, Mooring. Leave. Now, that is unfriendly." Silas unrolled the paper. "Especially when I have got legal business." Fletcher took the paper and Jara watched his face darken as he read. "This is a forgery. Magistrate will decide that. Says right there I sold you the fare but not its contents. And she," he pointed at Jara, "was contents. Property legally obtained, never transferred." "That is a lie." "Prove it." Silas's grin widened. "Magistrate comes through in 2 weeks. We will present our papers then. Meanwhile, I will be taking her back into custody." "No." Fletcher's voice was cold steel. "You will leave now, or I will have you removed for trespassing." "You and whose army?" Peter emerged from the barn with a pitchfork. Myron appeared from the house with a heavy walking stick. A hired man who had stayed on, a grizzled farmer named Thomas, stepped out of the wheat field with a scythe. Silas looked at them and laughed, but it sounded uncertain. "You think this scares me?" "I think you should leave," Fletcher said quietly. "Before I forget, I am trying to be civilized." Silas spat. 2 weeks. Magistrate will give her back to me, and I will sell her south where they do not care about your pretty feelings. See you then." He climbed back in the wagon and the driver snapped the reins. They watched the wagon disappear down the road. Jara realized she was shaking. Fletcher turned to her. "Breathe." He cannot just, he can try. He will fail." Fletcher looked at the forged document again, his jaw tight. "This is crude work. A child could spot it, but we need a lawyer, someone who knows the law." "I do not have money for a lawyer." "I do, and this is not about money, this is about principle." He folded the document carefully. "I will ride to town today. There is a circuit magistrate who will hear the case, and we will present our evidence." "What evidence?" "The original bill of sale, which lists the fare and all its assets, including you, as a bundled purchase. the testimonies of everyone who was here that night. And this forgery, which proves Mooring's intent to defraud. Jara stared at him. You truly think it will work? Yes, because the law, for all its flaws, does not favor fraud. He left within the hour. Peter and Thomas kept watch, and Myron sat with Jara in the kitchen, but Jara could not eat or settle. She kept seeing the cage, kept feeling the metal bars against her palms. Fletcher returned late that night with a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Constance Merrill who listened to the story, reviewed the documents, and nodded briskly. Simple case, she said. Silas Mooring sold the fair and all its contents, which included you at the time. You are not property now because you were freed, but even if his claim were legitimate, which it is not, the sale extinguished his ownership. This forged document is pathetically bad. He will be lucky to avoid jail. You are certain? Jara asked. Absolutely. I have handled 50 cases like this. Mooring is desperate and stupid. We will destroy him. Constance smiled thinly. I do not like men who cage women. I will enjoy this. The 2 weeks crawled past. Jara could not settle, could not focus. She worked until her muscles screamed, trying to outrun the fear. Fletcher stayed close, and at night he sat with her on the porch, not speaking, just present. What if she is wrong? Jara asked one night. She is not. But what if then I will buy you from him again? Fletcher's voice was steady. And we will burn the document, and I will dare him to come back. Fletcher, you cannot. I can. I will. There is no version of this where you go back in that cage. She looked at him, at the hard determination in his face, and felt something crack open in her chest. Why me? What? Why do you care so much? You barely knew me when you bought the fair. You could have freed me and let me go. Why do you keep fighting? He was quiet for a long time. At first, because it was right. But now, he met her eyes, because I cannot imagine this place without you. Because you are the reason it works. Because he stopped. Say it, she whispered. Because I love you. The words were simple, unadorned. I have loved you since the day you stood in that field and told me you were a farmhand, maybe before. And I will fight anyone who tries to take you from me, because you are mine in the way that matters. Not property, not owned. Mine because you chose to stay, and I will defend that choice with everything I have. Tears burned in her eyes. This will not be easy. I do not care. People will hate you. Let them. Fletcher, Jara, listen to me. He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. I have spent my whole life being careful, being respectable, building a reputation, and it has made me wealthy and empty. You have given me a reason to care, a reason to stay, a reason to build something real. I do not give a damn what anyone thinks. I only care what you think. She was crying now, silent tears running down her face. I think you are an idiot, he smiled. I know. I think you are reckless and stubborn and too good for this world. Is there a compliment coming? I think I love you too. The words felt like leaping off a cliff. I have tried not to. I have told myself it is impossible, but I do. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, and she kissed him back, tasting salt and hope and the impossibility of it all. The magistrate arrived on a cold morning 2 weeks later, setting up court in the town's meeting hall. The room was packed, word having spread of the case. Silas sat at one table with a cheap lawyer he had scraped together. Fletcher and Jara sat at another with Constance, who looked calm and ready. The magistrate was an older man named Edmund Hale, and he had a reputation for fairness. He read both documents, listened to Silas's claim, then listened to Constance's rebuttal. This is a waste of the court's time, Constance said flatly. The forgery is obvious. The ink is different, the handwriting inconsistent, and the legal language is riddled with errors. Furthermore, even if it were genuine, which it is not, the original bill of sale supersedes it. Mr. Mooring sold the fair and all its contents. He cannot now claim he retained ownership of a single item. Silas's lawyer stammered a response about specific clauses and retained property, but it was weak. The magistrate held up the forged document to the light, examining it closely, then set it down. "This is indeed a forgery," he said, "and a poor one. Mr. Mooring, you are fortunate I do not have you arrested on the spot." "She was mine," Silas shouted, half standing. "I found her, I caged her, she was mine to sell or keep." "She is a person," the magistrate said icily, "and you sold your claim when you sold the fare. Case dismissed. Mr. Mooring, you are fined 50 silver for wasting this court's time and attempting fraud. If you contest this ruling or approach Miss Kaine again, I will have you jailed. Bailiff, escort him out." Silas was dragged from the hall, cursing and spitting. The crowd murmured, some approving, some clearly uncomfortable. Fletcher stood and offered Jara his arm, and they walked out together into the cold sunlight. "It is done," Constance said, satisfied. "He will not trouble you again." "Thank you," Fletcher said, paying her fee and a generous bonus. They rode back to the farm in the wagon, and Jara felt as though she could breathe for the first time in weeks. The fields rolled past, brown and sleeping for winter, and the house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney. Home. Winter settled over the farm like a heavy quilt. The work shifted to maintenance and planning, and the evenings grew long. Fletcher taught Jara to read, sitting with her by the fire and guiding her through the letters. She taught him the orc songs her mother had sung, low and rhythmic, and he hummed them while he worked. They grew closer, moving around each other with the ease of long partnership. He kissed her often now, in the barn or the kitchen or the fields, and she learned the shape of his smile, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. In the spring, they hosted a small gathering to celebrate the farm's first full year. Neighbors came, some curious, some cautious. A few left early when they realized the orc woman was not a servant but a partner. But others stayed, tasting Myron's cooking and admiring the farm's success. An older farmer named Gideon approached Fletcher as the sun set. "You have done well here, Jorren, better than I expected. Thank you. Though I will say your choice of partner is unusual." Fletcher's voice cooled. "Jara is the reason this farm succeeds." "If that troubles you, there is the road." Gideon blinked, then chuckled. "Easy, son, I meant no insult. I am saying she has done well, you both have." He paused. "For what it is worth, my wife and I think you suit each other." Fletcher relaxed slightly. "I appreciate that." The farm's reputation grew. People spoke of the high-quality crops and the well-kept animals. They spoke, too, of the orc woman who ran it and the human man who loved her, but the tone shifted from scandal to curiosity to, eventually, acceptance. Not from everyone, but from enough. In the third year, Fletcher asked Jara to marry him. He did it without flourish or grand gesture, simply sitting with her on the porch one evening and saying, "I want you to be my wife." She looked at him, at the farm they had built, at the life they had carved from wreckage. "Yes," she said. They married in the spring, a small ceremony with Myron and Peter and Thomas as witnesses. No priest would perform it, so the magistrate, Edmund Hale, came himself and officiated. He signed the documents with a flourish and told them, "You are as legally bound as any couple I have seen. Be happy." They held the reception at the farm's first harvest festival. The cages, which Peter had dismantled, had been repurposed into planters overflowing with flowers and into large, airy chicken coops. The wagons had been rebuilt into storage sheds. The fair was truly gone, transformed into something living and good. People came from 3 towns over, and the gathering stretched into the night. There was music and dancing and food in abundance. The bear, Bruno, watched from his enclosure, placid and fat. The goats wandered loose, begging scraps. Children ran through the fields, laughing. Fletcher found Jara near the barn as the stars came out. She was watching the celebration, her face soft. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes." She leaned into him and he wrapped an arm around her waist. "Are you?" "More than I thought possible." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the music and the laughter, and Jara thought of the cage, of the cold metal bars and the pointing crowds. It felt like another life, a story that had happened to someone else. Fletcher kissed her temple. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for building this with me, for trusting me when you had every reason not to." She turned to face him, taking his hands. "Thank you for opening the cage. I would do it again. I know." They returned to the celebration, and Fletcher pulled her into a dance, laughing when she stepped on his feet. Myron clapped from the sidelines, and Peter played a fiddle he had learned that winter. The moon rose full and bright, and the farm glowed in its light, every corner touched with silver. Later, much later, when the guests had gone and the fires had burned low, Fletcher and Jara walked the fields together. The crops were coming in strong again, the earth rich and giving. The house stood solid behind them, windows glowing. "I have been thinking," Fletcher said. "Dangerous." He smiled. "We should expand. Another 10 acres, maybe. Plant fruit trees, add more livestock. Ambitious. We have the means and the hands." She considered it, already planning in her mind. "We would need another barn. Peter can build it. And more help. We will hire locally." "Pay fair wages." She nodded. "It could work. It will work. Everything we have done has worked." She stopped and looked at him, at the man who had bought a fare to free strangers, who had turned cages into planters, who had loved her when the world said he should not. "Yes," she said, "it will." They stood in the moonlight, surrounded by the farm they had built from wreckage and will, and Jara felt the last of the cage fall away. She was free, truly free, not because the door had opened, but because she had chosen to walk through it. Because she had found a man who saw her not as a monster or a curiosity, but as a partner, an equal, a wife. The future stretched before them, full of work and growth and possibility. There would be hard seasons and challenges, prejudice that lingered and people who would never understand. But there would also be this, the quiet peace of a spring night, the solid warmth of Fletcher's hand in hers, the knowledge that they had built something real and lasting. Fletcher squeezed her hand. "Ready to go in a moment." She wanted to hold this, the stillness and the stars and the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. He waited with her, patient and steady, and when she finally nodded, they walked back to the house together. The door swung open under Fletcher's hand, lamplight spilling out, and they stepped inside. Behind them, the farm settled into sleep, the fields and animals and repurposed cages all resting under the wide night sky. Jara closed the door and turned to her husband, to the home they had made, and smiled. The cage was gone. In its place was this, a kitchen that smelled of bread, a fire crackling in the hearth, a bed waiting upstairs, and a tomorrow full of work and love and the life they had chosen. It was enough. It was everything. The years unfolded with the rhythm of seasons. The farm expanded as Fletcher had planned, fruit trees planted in neat rows that would bear in time, another barn rising under Peter's careful hands. They hired 3 more workers, locals who needed employment and did not care that their employer's wife was an orc. One of them, a young woman named Anna, became fast friends with Jara, and they worked side by side in the gardens, talking and laughing. Myron grew older but no less sharp, training Anna in the kitchen arts and selling her tonics in an ever-widening circle of towns. Peter married a girl from the village, and they built a small house on the far edge of the property. Thomas stayed on, claiming he was too old to start over elsewhere, though everyone knew he simply loved the work. Bruno, the bear, lived another 5 years, growing fat and lazy, and when he died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, they buried him under the oak tree at the edge of his enclosure. Fletcher carved a marker, and Myron said a prayer, and they stood together in the cold, remembering the scarred, dull-eyed animal he had been and the peaceful creature he had become. The farm prospered. There were bad years, a drought one summer and a hard frost that killed half the apple blossoms another spring, but they weathered them together, adjusting and adapting. Fletcher's horse trading continued to bring in steady income, and Jara's management kept the farm productive. They became known throughout the region, not as the scandalous couple or the orc and her keeper, but as the Jorrens, the ones with the good farm and the fair prices. In the 5th year, Jara realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher on a morning in early autumn, when the mist was still thick over the fields and the world felt hushed and private. He stared at her, his face cycling through shock and wonder and fierce joy. Then he picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and she clung to him and laughed too, dizzy with happiness and terror. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down gently as though she might break. "Yes. I do not know how to be a father. I do not know how to be a mother." They looked at each other, and then they were laughing again, breathless and giddy. The pregnancy was hard. Jara was sick for the first 3 months, and in the last month she was so large she could barely move. Fletcher hovered, anxious and protective, until she snapped at him to go work with the horses before she threw something. Myron cackled and told him to listen to his wife. The baby came on a cold night in late spring, a long and difficult labor that left Jara exhausted and Fletcher white-faced. But when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling bundle in Jara's arms, all the pain fell away. The baby was a girl, small and perfect, with green-tinged skin and the tiniest nubs of tusks. She had Fletcher's gray eyes and Jara's pointed ears, and she gripped her mother's finger with surprising strength. "She is beautiful," Fletcher whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his daughter with naked awe. "She is ours," Jara said. They named her Beatrice, after Fletcher's mother, and she became the heart of the farm. Everyone doted on her, from Myron, who sang her lullabies, to Peter, who carved her toys, to Thomas, who let her ride on his shoulders through the fields. She was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. When Beatrice was 2, Jara became pregnant again. This time it was easier, and the baby, another girl with darker green skin and Fletcher's stubborn chin, came quickly. They named her Wendy, and she was quieter than her sister, watching the world with solemn eyes. The children grew, and the farm grew with them. Beatrice followed Jara everywhere, mimicking her work, learning the names of plants and animals. Wendy clung to Fletcher, content to sit in the barn and watch him work with the horses. They were different, but they were loved fiercely, and they knew it. The world beyond the farm was changing too. More mixed families appeared, human and orc, tentative and hopeful. Laws began to shift slowly toward equality. It was not easy, and there was still prejudice, still violence in some places, but the tide was turning. Fletcher and Jara did not preach or campaign. They simply lived their lives, raising their children, running their farm, and treating everyone with fairness. People saw, and some of them learned. On Beatrice's 10th birthday, the family held a celebration at the farm. The old site of the traveling fair was unrecognizable now, covered in fields and orchards and sturdy buildings. The only remnant was a single planter, made from the bars of Jara's cage, overflowing with wildflowers. Beatrice stood in front of it, studying the flowers. "Mother, why is this one different?" Jara knelt beside her daughter. "Because it reminds us where we came from." "Where did we come from?" Jara looked at Fletcher, who had come to stand beside them. He nodded, and she turned back to Beatrice. "A long time ago I was trapped. Your father set me free, and we built this together. Like in the stories." "Better than the stories," Fletcher said, ruffling Beatrice's hair. "Because this one is real." Wendy tugged on Jara's sleeve. "Can I pick flowers?" "Yes, love, pick as many as you like." The girls ran off, laughing, and Fletcher took Jara's hand. They stood together, looking at the planter at the farm beyond, at the life they had made. "You ever regret it?" Jara asked. "The cost, the trouble, the stairs." Fletcher turned to her, his gray eyes warm. "Not once. Not ever. Even when people whisper, let them whisper. I have you, I have our daughters, I have this." He gestured at the farm. "I have everything that matters." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, and they stood in the sunlight while their children played among the flowers that grew from the bars of a cage. The harvest festival that year was the biggest yet. People came from all over, drawn by the farm's reputation and the promise of good food and music. Jara and Fletcher moved through the crowd together, greeting guests, overseeing preparations, their daughters darting between the adults with their friends. As the sun set, Fletcher pulled Jara away from the crowd, leading her to the hill that overlooked the farm. They sat in the grass, watching the lanterns being lit below, the music drifting up. "I have been thinking," Fletcher said, "still dangerous." He smiled. "I want to deed half the farm to you, legally." "In writing, Fletcher, it is already ours." "I know, but I want it in law. I want no question, no matter what happens, that this is yours as much as mine, that you are not here because I allow it, but because it is your right." She looked at him, her throat tight. "You do not have to, I want to. You have given me everything, Jara. A home, a family, a purpose. Let me give you this." She kissed him, slow and deep, tasting gratitude and love and the weight of years. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes." They sat on the hill until the stars came out, watching the festival below, their farm and their people and their life spread before them like a promise kept. The deed was drawn up and signed, and Jara became co-owner of the land in law as well as in fact. The magistrate, Edmund Hale, now retired, came himself to witness the signing, and he raised a glass to them afterward. "You have built something remarkable," he said. "Against all odds and expectations. Be proud." "We are," Fletcher said, his hand in Jara's. The children grew older. Beatrice developed a gift for working with animals, gentle and patient like her father. Wendy showed a talent for numbers, helping Myron with the accounts. They went to the village school, where they faced some teasing but also made friends, children who saw them not as oddities but simply as Beatrice and Wendy Jorren. There were still hard moments. A traveling preacher came through one summer and railed against mixed unions, calling them abominations. Fletcher confronted him publicly, calm and cold, and told him to leave. The preacher did, but not before spitting curses. That night, Beatrice asked her parents if they were abominations. Jara knelt and took her daughter's hands. "No, love, we are a family." Some people fear what they do not understand, but their fear does not define us. "Do not listen to fools," Fletcher added. "You and your sister are the best things I have ever done. Nothing about you is wrong." Beatrice nodded, reassured, and the moment passed. But it reminded them that the world, for all its progress, still carried shadows. They kept building. Another 5 acres, a second orchard, a dairy that supplied milk and cheese to 3 towns. Workers came and went, but a core group stayed, people who believed in what the farm stood for. It became a place of refuge, quietly, for others who did not fit the world's molds. A young man who loved other men found work there and safety. A woman fleeing an abusive husband was given a cottage and employment. An older orc, scarred and limping from a life of hardship, was hired to help with the livestock and given dignity and respect. Fletcher and Jara did not advertise it, but word spread. The Jorren farm was a place where you were judged by your work and your character, not by the circumstances of your birth or the shape of your body. The years turned. Beatrice grew into a strong, confident young woman who managed the livestock with skill and care. Wendy became the farm's primary record keeper, her neat handwriting filling ledgers and her sharp mind catching discrepancies. They were courted by local boys and girls, and they navigated it with varying degrees of grace, coming to their parents with questions and worries and hopes. Fletcher and Jara answered them as best they could, drawing on their own experience, their own fumbling path to love. They told their daughters to choose partners who respected them, who saw them fully, who would stand beside them when the world turned hard. "Like you and Father," Beatrice said. "Like your mother and I," Fletcher agreed. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Fletcher and Jara took a rare day away from the farm. They rode to the town where the magistrate had heard Silas's case, now grown into a small city. They walked the streets, visited the market, ate lunch at an inn. And then Fletcher led Jara to a jeweler's shop. Inside, he bought her a ring, simple silver with a small green stone. "I never gave you one," he said, sliding it onto her finger. "When we married, I should have." She looked at the ring, at the way it caught the light, and then at him. "I did not need one, I know, but I wanted you to have it." She kissed him there in the shop, not caring who saw, and the jeweler smiled and offered them a discount for being such a lovely couple. They rode home as the sun set, the ring warm on Jara's finger, and she thought of the girl in the cage, the one who had stopped hoping. She thought of the man who had bought a fare and opened every lock. She thought of the farm they had built, the children they had raised, the life they had carved from nothing. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me, when no one else did." Fletcher reached over and took her hand. "I saw you because you were impossible to miss. Strong and stubborn and brilliant. I just had the good sense to fight for you." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they reached the farm, their daughters ran to meet them, eager to share the day's news. Myron had dinner waiting, and Peter and his wife joined them, and they sat around the long table, talking and laughing. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the lamps dimmed, Fletcher and Jara walked the farm one last time before bed. It was a habit now, this nightly circuit, checking on the animals and the fields, ensuring all was well. They stopped at the wildflower planter, the one made from the cage bars. It was in full bloom, a riot of color even in the darkness. "I used to hate this," Jara said softly. "I wanted to destroy it, to forget. And now I am glad it is here. It reminds me how far we have come." Fletcher put his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, and they stood together under the stars, surrounded by the life they had built from wreckage and will and love. The farm would continue. The children would inherit it, and perhaps their children after them, and the story of the cage and the man who opened it would become family legend, told and retold until the edges blurred. But the truth would remain, solid and unchanging. A woman had been caged. A man had freed her, and together they had built a home. That was enough. That would always be enough.